I have explained all the concept. The last few slides were regarding the relationship between the elasticity of demand and the total revenue, right? For example, if your demand for your product happens to be elastic, right? Then when you lower the price you charge, what happens to your total revenue? If the demand for your product was elastic, right? And you lower the price of the product, what's going to happen to your total revenue?
It's going to increase.
It's going to increase, right? Because elastic demand means consumers react strongly to the price change, right? So if you cut the price by 10%, the quantity will increase by more than 10%, right? So that's going to increase your total revenue. Don't try to memorize these things, right? You should be able to think through, right? Think through the concept of elasticity, and you should be able to derive the conclusion based on that, right? Okay, chapter 8 is about producer behavior, and in the consumer behavior, we assume that the consumers try to maximize what? Huh? Okay, satisfaction or utility, right? Yeah. So we assume that the consumers, come up with all their decisions, right? How to allocate their resources in different consumption goods, right, or service, in order to maximize their utility, right? In production theory, in producer behavior, we believe the producers and suppliers are trying to maximize profit. Yes, right? And I gave you this before, but a shortage of white chalk. Can't find the white chalk. Okay. So profit, we use Greek letter pi for profit because we use P for price. Okay? And profit is total revenue minus total cost. Okay? And total revenue, as you know, is P times Q, right? And total cost is P times A TC, something like that. No, ATC times Q. Okay. So, in order to understand this profit maximizing behavior, in other words, how to maximize profit, well, we will try to, they'll try to increase the total revenue, total sales revenue, and decrease the cost, right? Because the profit is simply the gap between the total revenue and total cost, right? So the way you try to maximize profit is this, right? Try to increase the total revenue as much as possible, and try to minimize the cost as much as possible, right? Then you will be able to maximize the profit, right? So we need to consider two things here. Production, we're talking about quantity of output, or quantity of sale, or quantity sold, right? And the cost. Okay? So in this chapter, try to understand the production process, and then the cost of production. Okay? All right. So when we say cost in economics, we mean opportunity cost. Remember that? All the costs all the costs we talk about in economics, in this course and in your future economics courses, right? When we say cost, we mean opportunity cost. Okay? Some opportunity costs are explicit costs, others are implicit costs. Okay? Explicit cost means you actually pay this amount, okay, with money or with something, right? You actually paid for these things, whether you purchase the equipment or resources, material, ingredients, whatever, labor, right? You actually paid, right? Then we call it explicit cost. Yeah? Implicit costs are something that you have not paid. You actually do not pay for these things, right? But you still have to consider those as cost in order to make the best decision, best economic decision, right? You cannot ignore these costs, even though you do not pay for these things, right? Well, the best example is here. A business owner spends time running the business. Suppose you are running your own business, right? Then you don't really have to pay for yourself, even though, you know, if you own a small business, like suppose you own a grocery store or whatever, convenience store like GS25 or 7-Eleven, whatever, right? And you just started this business, right? Then probably you'll have to spend many hours a day, like 12 hours a day, right, in your store, right? But when you do the accounting, keeping your book, right, you may not actually consider the wage for yourself. Why not? Have you ever run any business? Right? You understand what I'm saying, right? You'll be spending a lot of time for your business, working for your business, right? But actually, you're not gonna. You don't have to pay for yourself. Why? Any idea? Because whatever is left after paying all other costs, like electricity or the actual items you purchase, the rental payments for your space, right? And if you hire any 알바생, yeah, you pay for their wages, right? After paying all those costs, whatever still remain is yours, right? Because you are the owner of the business, right? So whether you make the payment for your labor or not doesn't make any difference. You understand what I'm saying? So that's why the small business owners, they may not actually, record their own wages, right? And they may not pay for themselves because first thing, you have to pay all other costs first, right? Right? You owe someone else. If you get the supplies from the headquarters GS, right? 25, right? Then you have to pay all the merchandise, right? And then you may also have to pay some franchise fee, right? And then all other costs, utility or rent or whatever, right? Okay. Yeah. So even though you don't pay any money for your time, does that mean we can simply ignore and assume that your time is worthless or it's not worth anything? No, because in order to make the right decision, right business decision, in other words, before you start this business, at that time you have to decide whether you're going to start this business, or if you don't run this business, what are you going to do? You'll probably do something else, right? Maybe you'll find a job in a company, or maybe you'll work for other store, right? Whatever, right? So your time is definitely worth something. Actually, it is quite valuable, right? So when you make the decision, business decision, whether you're going to start this business or after running, say, a couple of years this business, you have to decide whether you're going to continue or you're going to shut down and, do something else, right? So making all these business decisions require accurate understanding or accurate calculation of profit, right? Is this business really profitable or not, right? And when you calculate that profit, you have to consider the value of your time, right? Here's a detailed example, right? So let's say Jill quits her $30,000 a year job. She was working for a company receiving $30,000 annual salary, right? But she decided to start a pizza store, right? So she quit that job and started this pizza store. And she used her own money, saving of $50,000 to finance this business, right? But that was not enough, so she actually borrowed some more money from the bank, right? Okay? So after running the business for 1 year, this is her accounting records, right? So first of all, there was the cost of all the material, pizza dough, tomato sauce, pepperoni, or whatever, cheese, right? And she paid $20,000 for those things, right? Wages of $48,000. This is the wage for somebody else, right? She hired some part-time cashier, right? So over the year, I guess she paid $48,000. Right? And then the interest payments on loan to buy pizza ovens. Okay? This is actually misleading. It's just not just the interest payments, but I think you should have said just the payments. Because when you buy something, like buying a car, right? Suppose you buy a car and you finance that car, right? And let's say you made a payment contract for, say, 5 years, 60 months, right? Which means you're going to pay for the principal plus interest. Principal is the price of the car, right? So price of the car plus interest payment, right? And you're going to pay the whole thing over the 5 years, right? In monthly payment, right? So this the payment should include not only the interest, but it should also include the actual price for the oven, right? Pizza oven here. All right, so for that she paid $10,000 during the first year, right? And the utility, electricity, $6,000, and then the lease payment for store, right? So the monthly rent on the store space, right? And that was $24,000 per year. And actually, there are you can think of many other things like advertisement, right? Insurance, whatever, right? There'll be lots of things that you need to pay, right? So all these items in red, right? These are explicit costs, right? You actually pay for these things, right? But then, in addition to the explicit cost, there will be some other things like foregone salary. Foregone salary. What is foregone salary? What are we talking about?
Opportunity cost for starting growing.
More exactly, opportunity cost of, yes, it's part of opportunity cost, but the $30,000, where does it come from? The job she quit, right? In other words, the opportunity to make $30,000 that Jill gave up, right? She gave up that opportunity to run this business, right? So definitely that is an opportunity cost. The value of something. What you used to remember the concept of opportunity cost, right? It's the value of the best foregone opportunity. So if you had certain alternatives, right? You chose A, right? And then let's say among B, C, D, right? Which one was the next best choice, right? So the value of that, the best foregone opportunity, right? That best foregone alternatives, right? That's the idea of opportunity cost. So if Jill hadn't run this business last year, she would have continued working for that company, and she could have received what, $30,000, but she gave up that $30,000 opportunity to run this business, right? So that's the idea of foregone salary, and that should be considered, right, to calculate the profit for this business. You know, to find out whether this business was worth or not, right? You have to consider that as a part of the cost, right? What about the foregone interest? What are we talking about here? Interest. $3,000. Any idea?
Is it the interest that she might have gained if she deposited $30,000?
$30,000?
And foregone salary?
No.
Or the $50,000?
Right. She used her own money, right? She used $50,000 in her savings account. And then, of course, if you put money in savings account, you earn interest on that money, right? But she now withdrew that $50,000 and she used that money to run this business, right? So she gave up this opportunity to make $3,000 interest return on that money. You understand? Right? So that's the idea of foregone interest. Okay? And finally, economic depreciation. What is this? Depreciation. Depreciation in Korean is 감가상각, right? So whatever you have typically in capital, right? If you buy your car or any equipment, right, like pizza oven, right? They have their useful life, right? So for tax purpose, usually in the United States, the automobiles are considered 5-year property, right? So when you suppose you purchased a car to use in your business, right? Then instead of deducting the 100% cost of the car, you're supposed to deduct about 1/5 or 20% of the value of the car every year, right? That is called depreciation. Right? So what that means is, suppose the car was initially it was worth $10,000, right? Then over the first year, you are, well, I guess it is assumed that 20% of this value is used for the first year. In other words, every year 20% of your car's value disappears, because after 5 years, right, that car is considered worthless. You have used up the entire value of that car, right? If the equipment considered 5-year equipment, 5-year asset, right? Okay, so that's the idea of depreciation. So every year, whatever you use your car or oven or whatever, there will be wear and tear, right? They become old, right? And after some years, you won't be able to use those equipments anymore, right? So you have to deduct those values, right? So that's the idea of here. The economic depreciation, so $10,000. So, well, perhaps you had your pizza oven, and maybe you had some other kitchen equipments, right? And some furnitures, right? Or whatever, right? Maybe you had a delivery scooter, right? To deliver the pizza, right? You had some couple of scooters, right? And all these equipments, there will be wear and tear every year, right? And after some years, you won't be able to use them anymore, right? So you have to consider this the value that disappears every year, right? That's the idea of economic depreciation. You understand the concept of depreciation? You lose the value of your capital every year, right? And even though you don't pay for this depreciation, actually, right? You have to consider those as the cost, right? Okay, so the total cost of the running this pizza shop for 1 year came out to be $151,000, right? And that's economic cost. Economic cost includes both explicit and implicit costs. Okay? Make sure you understand the concept of those two, right? Accounting cost is only explicit cost. In accounting, you cannot consider implicit cost because there's no receipt, right? You have not paid for these things, right? So there is no way you can have any evidence or proof that you have actually used money or you paid for these things, right? So in accounting, you cannot use implicit cost, right? So in accounting, only the explicit costs are considered, right? In economics, however, you have to use the concept of implicit cost because the main purpose of accounting is taxes, right? So, if you ask who's the best accountant, right? The best accountant is someone who can use all these tax laws and the knowledge and tricks and techniques, right, to reduce the amount of tax you have to pay, right? After making the profit, right? So that's if you can do that, you will be considered the best accountant, and you will be able to make a lot of money as an accountant if you know how to do that, right? But the purpose of economic analysis is to make the best decision, right? Like, should we start this business? Is this business going to be profitable, right? And then every year, based on the record, you have to decide, should I continue running this business, or should I shut down and start something else, or go back to my old job of working for a company, or should I even go back to the school, right? Graduate school, whatever, right? So when you make those business decisions, you have to consider implicit costs, right? Implicit costs is important, right? All right, so economic costs is explicit cost plus implicit cost. Economic profit is the total revenue minus economic costs. Again, economic cost includes both explicit and implicit, right? Accounting profit, on the other hand, is simply total revenue minus accounting costs. So let's say you calculated economic profit and accounting profit for your own business, right? Based on your record of last year, right? Which one will be larger? Between economic profit and accounting profit, which one will be larger? Accounting profit, right? Why? Yeah. For both profit, you subtract from total revenue, you subtract economic cost in order to calculate economic profit, right? And for accounting profit, you subtract accounting cost, right? Between economic cost and accounting cost, which one is larger? Economic cost will be always larger than accounting cost, right? Because accounting cost only considers explicit cost, right? But economic cost is explicit cost plus implicit cost, right? So economic cost can never be smaller than the accounting cost, right? Economic cost is always larger than accounting cost. That means economic profit is always what? Economic profit will be always smaller than accounting profit. You make sure you understand that relationship, right? Don't try to memorize. It's going to be confusing, right? So here are a couple of interesting things to consider. The zero accounting profit, if you make zero accounting profit, that is not a very good situation. That means your business is not very good. It is not a very healthy situation for your business, right? Or you can say your business is about to go out of business, right? Okay. So again, in reality, all your accounting should be based on the explicit cost, right? So what you actually deal with in typical situation when you run the business is the accounting profit, right? And based on the accounting profit, you will calculate your tax due, and you have to pay the taxes based on the accounting profit, right? And in reality, when you start a new business, right, typically, accounting profit is negative, right? New startup businesses usually lose money rather than make money in the first year, right? And typically, in the United States, there's an IRS, right? Internal Revenue Service, right? Which collects the taxes for the country, right? And you know, people are afraid of IRS, especially, you know, IRS audit. You know what it is? Audit? Yeah. What do you say? In the news, whenever the government wants to put some pressure on the businesses, right? Like Lotte or Samsung or whatever, right? They threaten with this audit, right? And you know, audit is the worst thing that the business can have, right? And they'll find something, right? And you can even go to jail, right? If you did something illegal, right? So, you know, if you don't do things very well, right? I mean, if you're unlucky, right? Then you'll get audit from IRS, right? And they say once you start the business, you know, during the first 3 to 5 years, right? You're not gonna get audit, even if you report negative profits, right? So typical accountants recommend that, you know, don't worry about this thing, right? And just deduct everything as much as possible, right? And just report the negative profit, right, to the IRS, and that means you don't have to pay any tax, right? Your tax due will be 0, right? And really, and I've run the business in the U.S., right? And I've never got IRS audit, even though I reported negative profit almost 5 years, right? And then, let's say about 3 years later, suppose your accounting profit became 0. Right? Accounting profit became 0, right? And that's what they call a breaking even. Break even. Right? And then maybe the people may celebrate. Suppose you're running this business with your partner, right? Say, hey, we broke even this year. Finally, let's celebrate, because we are not losing money anymore, right? Well, is that a good situation, breaking even? Something to celebrate? Okay. Well, so 0 accounting profit is not really a good situation, because think about it. If you broke even, if you're making 0 accounting profit, right? How do you finance your own, let's say, apartment rent? How do you pay for your own apartment rent? Because accounting profit, in the cost, you did not consider the implicit cost, right? This accounting cost only includes explicit cost, what you actually paid, right? So for all the material or merchandise or utility or rent, whatever, and your employees, right? So 0 accounting profit means your sales revenue was just enough to cover your explicit cost, right? And what about you, yourself? You're the owner of this business, right? But you didn't pay for yourself, right? So how are you going to pay for your own apartment rent? How are you going to buy your own food or your utility for your apartment, not at the store? Utility for your store is included in this cost, right? And what about entertainment or your education? If you have your family, then your family's expense, right? None of those were covered or included in accounting profit, right? So making 0 accounting profit is a terrible situation. It's an unsatisfactory situation, right? 0 economic profit, on the other hand, is a satisfactory situation and very healthy situation. In fact, that's actually ideal situation. If you go to your next class in actual economics or intermediate economics, you will learn, right? This 0 economic profit, 0 economic profit, this is actually a long-term equilibrium condition in the market, in the industry, right? So in the let's say this is a market or industry, right? And this is what we call equilibrium point, right? Equilibrium point, equilibrium price, and equilibrium quantity, right? For a market to come to an equilibrium, the profit has to be, economic profit has to be 0. Because if the economic profit was greater than 0, right, then what's going to happen is market will have to adjust. Supply will increase. Because, well, I'm just going to make it as a brief explanation, because you don't have to worry about this thing in this course, right? But just to give you an idea, right? Okay, so if this is the industry, so the price is determined in the market, And suppose the market structure is perfect competition, right? So under the perfect competition, everybody, all the individual producers accept that the market price, say P, right? And then they will decide their own the output, right? Where the market marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, right? So at this point, the quantity supplied will be determined for each individual company, right? And for each individual company, then they can calculate their own profit, right? Suppose the company is really good, I mean, in other words, very efficient, right? You have good, better technology, you have modern equipment, whatever, the management is good, right? So suppose your cost is very low, right? Then you're something like, this will be your per unit cost, right? So that means your total revenue is P times Q, right? So this area will be your total sales revenue, and your total cost will be average total cost, right, times Q, right? So the difference between the total revenue and the total cost, right, this will be the size of your profit, right? Well, if your company is not very good, in other words, it's not very efficient, right? Suppose your cost is high, right? Then your cost will be high, right? ATC, right? Then what? You're at this quantity, right? Your profit will be actually negative, right? Because the total cost will be higher than, this is ATC, right? This is your cost curve, right? So your per unit cost is higher than the price you can charge, right? That means you're losing money, right? Well, overall, if the market is in equilibrium, again, what's the concept of equilibrium? No further change, right? No further change, right? So for a market to come to an equilibrium, there shouldn't be any adjustment, right? And at that moment, the typical company or average company should be making a zero profit. Will be like this, right? So typical company will be in this situation, which means the price is equal to your per unit cost, right? So let's say you're producing pizza, right? And in the market, the price you can charge per pizza is, say, $10, right? And the typical company's per unit cost, right? So considering everything, right, including the value of owner's time, which means including the amount of money that the owner must receive, right, to continue the business, right? Considering everything, it costs exactly $10 to produce each pizza, right? So that means the economic profit is zero in this situation, right? You understand? It costs exactly it costs $10 to produce each unit of pizza, and you can charge exactly $10 when you sell the pizza, right? So your economic profit will be zero, right? For some reason, let's say equilibrium breaks, right? So what that means is, let's say suddenly people love pizza, right? The taste, people taste changes, right? So the demand increases, right? And as a result, the price increases. Now you can charge, say, $12 per pizza because demand is strong, right? Then what's going to happen? From the initial situation, the price is higher, right? So for existing companies like this blue ATC curve, right? They will suddenly make positive profit, right? Because now, at this quantity of output, right? Total revenue is $12 times whatever, but the total cost is only this much times quantity, right? So suddenly, existing companies will make positive profit, right? Then, from all other industry, let's say right across the street, there was a barber shop, right? And this barber shop guy looks at the pizza store across the street, and he finds out, boy, they're selling lots of pizza. Yeah, people are coming to this store and they are lining up outside the store to buy the pizza, right? So what am I doing here, right? Maybe I should open up a pizza shop because, right, using the same amount of resources, right? Apparently, they are making a lot more money than I do, right? I mean, let's say Jill and this barber Jack, they are high school buddies. They graduated the same high school, right? So you know, she's not any smarter than me, right? You know, we were about the same in the high school, right? And so she's not educated better than I am, right? She's not using any more money than I do, right? So, you know, you'll compare, right? Somehow, using the same type and same amount of resources, that pizza business is making a lot more money, right? That's what this means, economic profit. If the economic profit is positive, right? Think about it, right? If economic profit is positive, right? That means the total revenue exceeds the total cost, right? And this total cost is calculated using the concept of opportunity cost, right? So you know, in this particular business, the reward for the same type of investment is somehow greater, right? So what's going to happen? Market will adjust, right? More people will start the pizza business, right? And supply will start increasing because more people came into this business to produce pizza, right? And that adjustment will continue until what? Until the price comes down to the initial level, which means the profit for the typical producer returns to 0. Right? That's why we call this a long-term equilibrium condition. 0 economic profit. Right? So only when the economic profit is 0, the adjustment will stop and the market will come to an equilibrium. Right? If the economic profit is positive, then the supply will increase and you know, it will reduce the amount of profit. For some reason, economic profit is negative, suppose, right? Economic profit was negative. Then what that means is while using the same amount of resources, right, the return or the reward for that resource is not as good as the in other industry. So some people in the pizza business will shut down the pizza and use that amount of resources for other business, right? Because compared to other business, this pizza business is less profitable, right? Okay? That's the idea. Okay? So let's say try to understand the concept of economic profit, right? And so the making zero economic profit means all the costs, both explicit and implicit costs, are covered, and owners are receiving exactly the market rate of return on their invested asset and time. How do you know? First of all, how do you calculate the market rate of return, right? And why does making zero economic profit imply that you are making market rate of return on your investment? Now think about that space. Suppose you are using this space, store space, for your own pizza shop, right? Well, so when you calculate the profit for your business, right? Suppose you think this value for your space is, say, $1,000 per month. In other words, if you didn't use this space for your own business, what could you have done? If you hadn't run this pizza shop in your space, what can you do with that space?
Because it rents.
Yeah, you can let somebody else to rent this space, right? And you receive the rent, right? So if you think you could have received, say, $1,000 as the rent or monthly rent for this store, right? Then you have to use that $1,000 as the cost, right? You understand? As an implicit cost, right? Because even though you are not paying the rent because that's your own space, you are giving up an opportunity to make $1,000, right? By using this space for yourself, right? So you have to consider, you have to include that $1,000 as an implicit cost, right? And for any other implicit cost, you do the same thing. Your salary, which that means that's the value of your time, right? The foregone interest, right? Suppose the bank pays 2% annual interest on your money in the savings account, right? Then you have to use that 2% as the implicit cost, right? So after doing all that, you are making zero economic profit, right? What does that mean? After you include all those implicit costs, right? Your economic profit came out to be zero. That means your total sales revenue was that was just enough to pay all your costs, right? Both explicit costs and implicit costs. Which means your store space has been paid exactly $1,000 per month, right? Because you have included that $1,000 as the cost, right? And your sales revenue covers that $1,000, right? So you are receiving exactly the market rate of return. Do you understand that idea? If I do it the other way around, right? Because you have included, when you calculated this implicit cost, you use the market rate, right? You thought, well, this store space is worth $1,000 in the market. If I put it in the market, say the 부동산 office, right? If you put that office space and ask them to find a tenant for this space, right? Because the real estate 부동산 아저씨, right? Told you that, well, you can probably get $1,000 per month for that space, right? So based on that, you have included $1,000 as your rent cost, right? Implicit cost, right? So that's why we say if you make zero economic profit, right, you are receiving exactly the market rate of return on your investment, on your asset, right? Okay, good. All right, let's continue. All right, so technology is an important concept in production area, right? There is what's called the production function. Okay? So, of course, technology determines your production process. Okay? So, in this example, we have a very simple example here. Let's say we have quantity of workers and quantity of pizza ovens, and then the quantity of output. Okay? So according to this table, if you use no worker and you have 2 pizza oven, of course your output will be 0. You cannot produce pizza, or you cannot produce anything without labor, right? Yeah. If you have 1 unit of labor, right? Unit of labor is usually man hour. Man hour. Well, this is misleading. This is not a very good term because this man includes women, right? So this should have been person hour, right? But so if you use say 2 people for 8 hours a day, right? Then the unit, the amount of labor you use was 16, right? 2 times 8, right? So there will be 16 man hour, right? As the amount of labor you use, right? All right. So this table shows the amount, the relationship between the input and output, right? If you use such certain quantity of input, you will be able to produce certain quantity of output, right? That's what we call production function. Production function is Q as a function of x1, x2, x either k or n, right? I say Q is the quantity of output. Yeah? Quantity of output. All these x's are inputs, different input, right? So maybe this is labor, quantity of labor, how many man hours, right? And whatever, pizza oven, how many pizza oven, right? And then the amount of tomato sauce, amount of pepperoni, amount of cheese, and pizza boxes, and the electricity, and whatever, you know, the store space, right? How many square foot of space you need, and so on, right? So, you know, some, for even this simple product of pizza, right? You can think of so many different inputs, right? Think about the automobile, car, right? How many different inputs you think would be involved in a production process, right? How about a airplane, like Boeing 787, Dreamliner, right? Yeah. In order to produce one Boeing 787, yeah, what kind of and how many different inputs? Could be millions, right? And then how about the functional form? Yeah. You know, if it's a pizza case, maybe you can say it's a simple additive form. Like, well, in order to produce one pepperoni pizza, you need say half hour of labor, right? 0.5 labor, right? And whatever, 200 grams of pizza dough, right? And 20 grams of tomato sauce, right? So it could be simply additive forms, yeah? Simplest functional form, right? So what that means is if you want to produce two pepperoni pizza, right? Then you may have to, just double the whole thing, right? Could be very simple functional form, right? But in some cases, in some other products, it could be more complicated functional form. It could be multiplicative, could be whatever, what we call the there are some popular functional form for this production, right? In this course, we're gonna just simplify, okay? So we think typically all we need to know here is the concept of production function, and production function is something. Production function defines the relationship between inputs and output, right? So we can simplify, say, Q as a function of L and K. Right? L stands for labor, right? Human labor, right? So we're gonna put all kinds of inputs, so many different types of inputs, into just the two categories, right? Labor and capital, right? Labor includes only one type, human labor. How many man-hour, right? All the rest, whether it's an equipment, material, ingredient, utility, machine, or factory, plants, or land, or money, or whatever, right? All other things will be included in capital. Why do we use K for capital when capital is actually C? Yeah, well, the direct reason is we use C for cost, right? So we use K. Why K? Because what K is what comes from das Kapital. Das Kapital, right? And well, you know what? We talked about this book, right? In the first week, right? Who's the author? Karl Marx, right? And this is a very important book in economics, right? But when I was a college student in Korea, this book was actually prohibited, right? Nobody could read this book. Nobody could teach the Das Kapital or 자본론 in colleges, right? But still, many students actually read it, right? But you could not do it officially, right? Even in the United States, I heard that until late 60s, right? The professors could not mention this book. I mean, actually, until about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, right? The economic principles textbooks didn't even mention this book, right? Because there was very strong anti-communist sentiment, right, in the U.S., right? Actually, until during the 60s, if you actually mentioned this book in college classroom, right? If you taught this book, they say that they could have lost their job, right? The teachers, professors could have lost their job, right, by mentioning this one, right? Anyway, so that's the I guess the origin of L and K, right? All right, so we can simply just consider this as a simplified production function, right? Cobb Douglas, yes, I was thinking about this functional form, right? The very popular functional form used in economic analysis in your future course. That is called the Cobb Douglas Cobb Douglas. Well, Cobb is, well, both are economists. Cobb and Douglas economists, right? And Douglas was a senator, actually, U.S. senator. He became a U.S. senator as an economist, right? So they came up with this functional form. You'll learn about it in the future course, right? Okay, so let's say in this example we have this relationship between input and output, right? Let's just talk about one more slide here. Okay, division of labor. Yeah? When Adam Smith wrote his book, Wealth of Nations, right? If you remember, he talked about this how to increase the wealth of nation, right? And his idea was, of course, leave it alone, right? Don't get into the market and try to control anything, right? Don't interfere in the market process, right? If you just leave it to the market, then everything will be perfect because there is invisible hand, right? The idea of invisible hand. And we think actually the invisible hand, when Adam Smith mentioned invisible hand, he was thinking about supply and demand, right? So, the supply is the representation of producers' willingness and ability, right? Demand is a representation of consumers' willingness and ability, right? So in the market, if you just leave them alone, right, they're going to interact, and the price will be determined, and quantity will be determined. As a result, the ultimate the resource allocation will be determined, right? And they will be perfect, right, according to Adam Smith, right? And one of the details that Adam Smith mentioned was the specialization and division of labor. Division of labor, right? If you read the chapter, actually, I think they're confusing in this textbook, right? It mentions the specialization as a result of division of labor. But at least when Adam Smith mentioned these two things, they were two different things. Okay? The specialization is the idea that people with different talent doing different things, right? Like people who have talent in music become musician, right? People who are good in making the dresses becoming tailor, right? Or people who are good in what? Biology become medical doctor, right? Those things are meant by specialization, right? So people with different talent doing different things. Division of labor has nothing to do with talent. Okay? It's simply you are dividing a production process. There is a long process of production, right? If you think about making anything like pizza, or you're starting from making the pizza dough from the flour and so on, right? Adam Smith used the example of very simple product, pin. Very simple pin, right? So how do you make this pin? With the pin you use for tailoring, right? Well, he divided the process into 9 different steps, right? So first person cuts the wire to the same length. The second person sharpens one end, right? Make the sharp end. The third person makes the head on the other end. The next person shines this, whatever, the wire pin, right? And the next person counts and packs them into a box, something like that, right? So that was an example that Adam Smith used as the division of labor, right? So this is the idea of assembly line. You know what assembly line is, right? If you go to factory, right? There's a long line of production, right? And the people standing at one post, and they do the same thing every day, right? One person tightens this bolt on the same location every day, right? What does that do? What's the result of this division of labor? This increase what? Productivity, right? So when you do the same thing, same task over and over every day, you become an expert, right, in that area, right? So instead of one person doing everything, right, you divide the process into very narrowly defined tasks, right, and let each person do the same task over and over, right? That will increase the productivity, right? So as a result, right here, 2 workers can produce more output per worker than 1 worker can, right? So suppose, sorry, give me just 1 minute, right? Suppose when you had 1 worker, she used to produce, say, 200 pizzas per day, right? And when you have 2 people, you add in another worker. Instead of output becoming 400, right? The total output becomes 500, right? Because instead of one person doing everything, starting from the flour to the final packing of the pizza, now they can divide the whole process, right? So productivity increases. So per worker output, this is the labor output, and this is the average product, total product, and let's say this is average product. Average product is, of course, what? P divided by O, or Q divided by L, right? Total output divided by the unit. Let's say this is Q, which is product, total, what we call product, total product, right? So it was 200, this would be 250, right? Per worker output, right? So that's the idea of division of labor, right? Increasing the output per worker, right? Output per worker increases, or average product increases as a result of the division of labor. Okay, so we have to finish this chapter on Thursday. I'm going to go a little fast on Thursday. Make sure you read the chapter very carefully, right? And try to understand everything yourself, right? All right, see you on Thursday.